Yeah, welcome here to Seismic Radio, and welcome to another session in Romans. And we're going to look at Romans chapter 2, and it's verse 12. And it's only a few verses we're going to look at to verse 16. I'm just going to read it to you. For as many as have sinned without the law will also perish without the law, and for as many as have sinned in the law will be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are just in the sight of God, but the doers of the law will be justified. For when the Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, are a law to themselves, who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness between themselves and their thoughts, accusing or else excusing them, in the day when God will judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to my gospel. Okay, so that is the text. And we're going to look at this in a bit more detail now. Okay, first of all, we've got a major question. What is the law? And especially if you're a new Christian and you haven't really spent much time in the Bible, it's always a big question, what is the law? And one thing you find as well, that's quite an important question, that the law is mentioned in the New Testament, especially in the epistles, very often. So you've got like references to the law in almost every epistle, and the big conflict, are we saved by keeping the law or observing the law or by grace? So what law are we talking about? Is it the law of the country? Or is it a law you make up in your mind? Is it some ethics? Or is it a universal ethical code? Is it the Ten Commandments? I mean, especially if you've got some sort of Christian background, you might think, yeah, Ten Commandments, I've been told this in Bible school or Bible, Sunday school, or in the catechism, so therefore it must be important. And no doubt that they are important, but when we talk about the law, we have to go back to the first 5 books of Moses. And especially when we look at Exodus, Numbers and Leviticus, and bits in Deuteronomy as well. So there are 3 books in the Bible, or 4 books, where there's a lot of reference to the law. For the Jews, the law was really important. They spent a lot of time, trying to understand what the law really says, observing the law. And that in the time of Paul was really the job of the scribes, the Pharisees, and maybe the Sadducees as well, to instruct the people on the law. And they thought at the time that through observance of the law, God will take pleasure in them, and it's the road to salvation, being pleasing to God, and when they die, and they've observed the law very well, respected God very well, through observing the law, they will be received into heaven. And that was really the understanding, the Jewish understanding at the time, and to some extent it may still be today. So there are a lot of things in the law. It starts with, we're going to talk about it later, as with the circumcision. A child, when it was born in a Jewish family, had to be circumcised. Then we got all the Sabbath laws, so that you weren't allowed to do a lot of things on the Sabbath, which is the 7th day, not the Sunday, but the Saturday, starting on Friday at 6 o'clock and going till Saturday at 6 o'clock in the evening. And again, a lot of things you weren't allowed to do. You weren't allowed to do any work. You were forced to rest. You had to, even only were allowed to do a certain number of steps and so on. We've got other laws as well. We've got ceremonial laws about washings and keeping clean and things like that. We had laws on, keeping food. We had dietary laws on what you were allowed to eat and what you were not allowed to eat. So, for example, pork was a big no-no, beef was okay, lamb was okay, and certain fowl, like birds, you could eat, and certain you couldn't. And so the list goes on and on and on. I'm not quite sure how many laws there were. I would think that it's laws regulating pretty much every aspect in life would go into maybe 1,000 or something. I'm not sure. I once heard a figure of several hundred laws, but it really depends on whether, you've got a law and then you've got all the sub-laws and so on. So the main point here, and this is what Paul is referring to, we've got the law, and the law is described in the Old Testament. The Jews very often, the learned Jews would extend this law as well. So, for example, the Pharisees, they would, take it one step further. Jesus talks to them that, if they've got some herbs, they tithe them. Yeah, that was the law as well. You have to give 10% as some sort of temple tax to the temple. That's where a lot of churches get this idea from. But it's Old Testamental. It's not. There's no reference to it in the New Testament. The New Testament is a completely different way of looking at things, not relinquishing the old system or the old way of the Old Testament, but fulfilling it and building on the Old Testament in Jesus having fulfilled the law 100%, and in Him or through Him we have got the same fulfillment. But we're going to look at this thing a little bit later. We need to understand, when we read the Bible and when we read the book of Romans, what Paul is saying about the law, and what is he meaning? What is he referring to? Is it speeding? If you speed and you break the law because in a 60-mile zone you did 70 or 80 miles. Is this what is meant with that, or is it something else? And obviously we are going back to the Old Testament, and there's a law codex for the Jews in the Old Testament. And when Paul talks about it, that's what he's referring to. And again, we've got this problem. Christianity in the first century was considered to be a Jewish sect. There were a lot of Jews amongst the Christians who have converted to Christianity. They've accepted Jesus Christ as their Messiah. And many of them continued keeping the law. So they would continue the lifestyle, of dietary requirements, keeping the Sabbath, certain washings and so on. So they were keeping the lifestyle. Yeah. And then obviously we had Gentiles as well who had a completely different background. They were brought up in the Roman or Greek culture, the Hellenistic culture, pagan culture in essence. And these guys, for them it was a big question. What are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to stop eating the stuff we used to be eating, and now we have to follow, the Jewish dietary requirements and so on? And Paul looks at that later as well. Now, we've got one instance in Acts where there was a council in Jerusalem just before I go any further, and it was agreed that no other burden should be placed on the Gentiles who come to Christ other than refraining themselves from food which is strangled, so that's meat with blood still in it. And the main reason for that is not to offend the Jews, since that has been preached from the very beginning. So you're not allowed to eat animals with the blood still in it. Yeah. And why you're not allowed to eat it, not to be an offense to the Jews, and to remember the poor, which is common sense. So basically, it was felt in Jerusalem that, with Peter and, all the big guys, the big guns at the time, that the law should not be imposed upon the Gentiles. And it would have been a colossal change in their way of life. Sometimes maybe impossible to stick to it, or depending on, what the social environment was. So, for example, if you were a slave and suddenly you go to your master and you say, I'm no longer going to work on a Saturday because I'm going to keep the Jewish law, you would be in serious trouble, and it probably wouldn't work, since the Romans kept Sunday as the day, a holy day. Okay, anyway, let's go back to the text in Romans here, and we're going to hopefully understand a little bit more what the law is all about. And what Paul is saying, for as many have sinned without the law, will also perish without the law. Bearing in mind, the Jews, they see that the key for their salvation is in observance of the law. That's the Jewish tradition. So you observe the law, and if you break it or you make a mistake, you go to the temple, you offer a sacrifice, then your transgression is relinquished and you carry on observing the law. And then later, at the end of days, resurrection, God's going to look at how well you've kept the law and either let you into heaven or not. So that was the whole idea. The New Testament says, look, it's no point. The law is prophetic. It points to Jesus Christ. And even the Old Testament says that you're not justified by the law. It's just helping you to have a better life by observing the law. and it only works if the whole community does it. But even in the Old Testament, we find that the just will live by faith. And Paul has already mentioned this in chapter 1. So the faith is the key. It's not the law, observance of the law, but it's faith, even within an Old Testament context. Okay. So Paul says, for as many have sinned without the law will also perish without the law. So the law, yes, you don't have any law. So theoretically you could say, look, I don't have a law, so how should I know that I was supposed to, keep the Sabbath holy? So you'll also perish without the law. And as many as have sinned in the law will be judged by the law. So it doesn't really matter, either way, one way or the other. The law is there, and the law is there to highlight your rotten state, the rotten state of humanity, because we are not keeping it. If you don't have the law, you will die without the law. If you have the law, you will die through the law and perish through the law. For not the hearers of the law are just in the sight of God, but the doers of the law will be justified. Okay, makes sense as well. So it's not just, hearing the law, but doing it. And for when the Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, are a law to themselves, who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts accusing or else excusing them. And in the day when God will judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to my gospel. So the point Paul is making here, that the doers obviously make sense, the hearers of the law. If you hear the law, it doesn't mean that anything, will happen to you. You'll not be justified. If you do the law, you will be justified. And he goes further and he says that even Gentiles, if they keep the law without knowing the law, they'll surely be justified. If they show, that there's a law written in their hearts and in their conscience, and they follow that they also would be justified through that. So it doesn't really matter. So the point Paul is trying to make here is, even though the law is very big in the Old Testament and it's a big issue for Jewish tradition, the point Paul is making is whether you have the law or you don't have the law, there's not much difference. So if you have the law and you're not keeping it, you will perish. If you don't have the law and you're just living loosely, you'll perish too. But if you don't have the law, but you do the things the law requires, then surely you'll be justified through that. And everything in the end will be judged. All the secrets of man will be judged by Jesus Christ according to my gospel. Paul says the gospel he is preaching. Okay, what is the sum of it all? It's a bit of a, talks a lot about the law. First of all, we need to understand, when we look at this, what is a law? Where does the law come from? And the answer is it comes from the Old Testament. Why is the New Testament talking about the law all the time? And it's important because we need to understand what the relationship is between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and how the law of the Old Testament affects us in the New Testament, in the New Covenant. And obviously he doesn't cover any ground in that area as yet. He'll do this later. But the main point he's saying is, look, you have the law and you think you've got something better, it's not going to help you, you're going to die through it, because ultimately you're not keeping it. If you don't have the law, even if you do the things which are written in the law, then you'll just as well be justified as a Jew would be justified for keeping all the bits of the law. Later in Romans we will see we come to the point where it's literally impossible for us to do this. It's impossible for us to keep the law simply down to the nature we've got inside of us, the old nature, or the Bible, or in Romans it's referred to as the flesh, the way we are, our genetic makeup. We are doomed to sin. We are doomed to fail in our relationship with God. And so we need something to try and make up the shortfall. And that something is Jesus Christ. I mean, he's not saying this as much in this small bit of text, but he'll say it later. The main point is, law or no law doesn't really matter. We are neither here nor there. If we try to keep the law, we fail. If we, if you don't have the law and we do the things which are required by the law, it would work, but later we'll see even that doesn't work because none of us are there. So, let me just sort of try and highlight a thing, and I'm going to divert a little bit from this text. There's a big problem in Christianity, and this text is addressing this as well to some extent. And I tell you what the problem is, and the problem is that by nature, and Romans, the whole letter of Romans deals with this. By nature, we feel we have to do something to please God and to appease Him. It's just normal. It's a bit deep down in the subconscious, you might say, or deep down in our hearts, or however you want to express this. We have got this feeling that something isn't quite right, that God is out there, we are here, we are not reaching up to God's standard, we are messing up all the time, and we need to do something about it. And so what we try to do is we try to, have something like a law, and it's pretty much all religions in the world. Most of them have got this common consensus. You need to do something to try and rectify the problem we have between us and God. And basically the odd thing about Christianity is we don't. We don't. We don't have to do anything at all because Jesus has done it all. And if we assume that we can do anything, we are minimizing or we are making small what Jesus has done for us. And that's something which we need to understand, which we need to recognize, that our relationship with God cannot be enhanced, improved, or anything by anything we do, other than receiving Jesus Christ in our lives, in our hearts, and in being willing to live by the Spirit and not by the flesh. It's a completely different dimension. And if you are a Christian, you will understand this because you will have received the second nature. And I'm talking about a real Christian. If you've never broken through and you've never become a Christian, to you it'll sound really crazy. But anyway, just bear with me, and maybe it'll make some sense, and maybe I can encourage you to dare to make this step, to invite Jesus Christ into your life, to trust in Him that He has died for all of your sin, that He has shed His blood for your sin, and that He has made right the relationship between you and God, that the barrier and the chasm which is there by nature between you and God has been taken away, and you've got free access to God. So I want to encourage you to just open your heart, to open your mind, to just look at this option and do this. Okay, I'm going to go back to the thought I had before, and the thought is that what we find in Christianity today is that there are a lot of churches, and I think it's going to be a real problem, even to the point that some people are not going to make it to heaven. That's what I honestly believe. But what these churches have done is they've come up with a New Testament and they made up a new law. They obviously the Old Testament laws, dietary requirements and things like that, they're no longer there, but they made up a new law, and I tell you what these laws look like. One of them is you need to dress a certain way. So you have to dress a certain way to be holy, because the Bible says that we should be different to the world. It never talks about dress code anyway, but they say, you need to dress like this or like that. Women need to have long hair, men need to have short hair. It doesn't really say this anywhere, but there are things in the New Testament, and what many churches have done is they've taken them out of context, and they talk about something else, and they've taken them and made them fit something. I'll tell you a few more things as well. You have to go to church on a Sunday. Then you have to give 10%. You have to possibly not smoke. If you smoke, it's really, really bad. You are not allowed to drink any alcohol at all. Any alcohol at all. That's again, it's another big law. And you're not allowed to go to a pub. Again, some of the things may be good in themselves. Smoking is bad, everybody knows it, but some people really struggle with getting rid of cigarettes, and they get a guilt complex about their habits, which may be good if it leads them to stop smoking, but it's not good if it affects their relationship with God. What else have we got? We've got the tithing thing as well, which is an Old Testament thing, and it's not really justified by the New Testament anywhere. But again, people make a big law out of it. Now, the problem is, there are all these rules. There might be 10, 20, 100 rules which are sort of knocked together of what people are supposed to do being a Christian and what they're not supposed to be doing. People then take these rules, they follow them, and it's like with anything. If you force your lifestyle into a certain template, it'll actually not, after some time, it'll not be hard to follow this, to get up a certain time of the day and to read your Bible. It's another law which they may make up. Again, nothing wrong with that, but it becomes a problem if it's ritualistic. To go to church at a certain time, to never miss a church meeting, to say certain prayers at certain times, to eat certain foods, to dress a certain way. Mostly, it has to be very. It's interesting as well. It has to be very traditional. You dress the way people used to dress 50 years ago or something. I remember when I was applying for a Christian university that one requirement to go to this university was you were not allowed to wear jeans. And I thought, what? Jeans is just clothing. Maybe 50 years ago it was provocative. In my generation, it's standard clothing. You don't ask about it. But they felt, it was spiritual to wear a certain type of clothing, and you were required to do so. And needless to say, I didn't go to the university. I thought there's something seriously wrong with these guys. And I'm not sure what they're doing today. I don't want anything to do with them, to be honest. But it's just legalism. That's what it's called, and that's what it's referred to. Okay, so what is the problem? The problem is none of the things they say in themselves, these churches or these groups, is wrong. It's good to live a good way. It's good to dress appropriately. It's good to have a good lifestyle. The problem is if you do this because you think that God is demanding this of you, and by fulfilling these things, you are pleasing to God, and by not fulfilling these things, you are in a bad relationship with God. That's when the problem starts, because the Bible doesn't take us anywhere in this direction. Not in the New Testament. Old Testament maybe, but not New Testament. And what am I saying here? What I'm saying here is that we need to be very careful. We shouldn't turn Christianity into a ritualistic exercise for our lives, and then expect when we die for God to say, well done, faithful servant. As a matter of fact, I'm convinced if this is the only thing you base your faith on, you probably end up in hell. It sounds very radical and sounds very cruel, but I think that's the case. When I read the New Testament, God is not looking for little robots who do little things in the hope of being pleasing to God, but God is looking for people who worship Him in spirit and truth. He's looking for relationship. He's looking for people who love Him and who are dedicated to Him. Instead of focusing on your lifestyle and on your ritualistic approach to your faith, you should focus on your relationship with God. And you should focus on your love to your Creator, on your love to Jesus Christ. And if you do this, things will result which might look very similar to the guy who has got this ritualistic approach, who brushes his teeth a certain time of the day. I mean, I went to a Christian group once, and what was really unacceptable, it's probably good as well, it was sugar in coffee or tea. I was quite shocked at that, and they said after some time, you get used to it. I think they didn't even drink coffee, they just drank tea, but the sugar was not allowed. It was a big no-no. I mean, I'm still doing it today, by the way, but obviously it's not a ritualistic thing for me, but it can be for some people, because you do all these things and then you seem to be okay. Okay, just to come back to this, God looks for people who worship Him in spirit and truth. He's not looking for little robots who have got a bunch of rules and they follow them, and that's it, and they leave it at that. If you love your Lord, if you love your God, your behavior, your outlook on life, the way you do things will automatically change. Not because you are forced to, or you're forced into some sort of template by some preacher or some group, but simply out of your relationship with God, where suddenly you find that you don't want to do certain things anymore. You simply don't want to do them. Whereas you want to do other things, you want to do positive things, and you don't want to do the negative things. So I want to encourage you to, not disregard the law as something which is bad or evil, just as a guideline, a little bit as a ruler to see where we stand, but not to observe the law, but instead to observe God and to enter into an intimate relationship with your God, and to worship your God in spirit and truth, to receive Jesus Christ in your life as your Lord and Savior, and as the one who loves you, who has died for you, who has done everything for you. And that's really the key in our relationship with God, and I really would like to encourage you to go down this way. Okay, I'm going to leave it on this. So, final thought. Don't get caught up in legalism. It doesn't work. It tends to ruin your life. More, it tends to ruin your eternity as well. It makes you very infertile in the things of God, and it makes it very boring. It makes your relationship with God going stale, and it's not going to get you anywhere. But if you are dynamic and you have a dynamic relationship with your God, it's very different. You will enjoy it. You will appreciate it. You will thrive on it. And it's easy as well. It's a lot easier. It's hard in one way, but it's easier in another way, because it doesn't throw tons of demands on you on how to live and how not to live and so on. Okay, you're listening to Seismic Radio. You can check us out at www.seismicradio.org. Email is info@seismicradio.org. We check it regularly, not every day, but regularly, so you can contact us there. And I want to thank you for your time with us, and I want to encourage you to to spend some time in the Bible, read Romans, and to read between the lines as well. Okay, God bless and bye-bye from Michael here at Seismic Radio.